you brought this up. I think it's in Exodus 12, where it's talking about the lamb and that you take it on the 10th day, you take it from the herd. Were you telling me they put it into the house, that you actually kept it, they kept it in the house?
Yes,
Is that you?
yeah.
And where did,
I don't know when, but it hasn't been recently, but yes, I believe that, yes.
I mean, what would be the I'm thinking there.
Because they had to be around it to make sure that it had no defects. So you had to observe it closely enough to see if there was anything defective about it at all.
I thought it was because it was trying to, like you don't make a sheep or something a family pet.
Right.
And when you go
Well,
eat them, you can't.
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of, that was the unspoken motive. Now, understand, we live in a time when, yes, anybody here not a meat eater? I know Louise has now become a vegetarian.
Oh, she's a vegan. There's a difference.
But vegan is more so. It's
Yeah.
a
More
vegetarian
strict.
on steroids.
They don't eat meat when you're looking.
No eggs, no.
Yeah,
no milk.
vegan is nothing, no animal byproduct protein at all. Everything is vegetable based.
Or plant-based, too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But although all of us are meat eaters and we, have a hamburger at McDonald's or a roast beef sandwich at Arby's or chicken sandwich at Chick-fil-A.
The biggest, rarest steak you can find.
Fine.
Yeah.
Yum. Most of us don't do the bloody part of that. But these people did. They butchered animals on a daily basis. Even the children. One of the things that much later than the biblical times, but in the Middle Ages, you would take kids 4 or 5 years old, maybe even younger, out with you on the hunts. The knights, when they weren't at war, would go on hunts all the time because it increased their martial prowess. Hunting boar, when you've got to spear that boar, if you can spear a boar, you can spear a man. But they would take the children, and one of the first things that you would do when you take a child is you would take them on a blooding hunt. What was a blooding hunt?
Oh, I read about it. It's where you cover them in blood after their first kill, basically.
Yeah, they put the blood on their faces, and the child would have to skin the animal. And why did they do that?
On the faces of the people.
On the person, yeah.
Sounds like something the Klingons would do.
Yeah.
Well, but again, because we don't have a real martial society where your life and death depends on having martial prowess. What does that do? What was the purpose in doing that? Yeah, they get used to spilling blood. You get rid of any of that squeamishness. Where it's just, yeah, okay.
Oh, people in my
I'm
family,
bathed up to my arms and
they take their kids hunting now.
Yeah.
People in my family with
Mhm.
guns.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's nothing new.
But usually not that young, and a lot of times up where I grew up and everybody, but they'd still, they wouldn't make the child literally kind of bathe in the thing's blood to deliberately expose them to blood, but they did because they wanted them to be at the point where they weren't at all squeamish. So what's the side effect of that? If you grow up in a society where if you're going to have lamb chops tonight, you go out and butcher a lamb. If you're going to have, chicken tonight, you chop the head off the chicken and pluck the thing and.
Desensitizes.
Exactly right. And that desensitizing means, do you feel any kind of loss from doing that after a while? No. So sacrificing an animal for sin, what was the upshot of that?
Didn't really have any impact.
Just another day in the neighborhood. So by God saying, you've got to take this lamb and examine it closely for 10 days, you had to bring it into your home. Couldn't keep it out in a pen because it might, get kicked by another thing. It might bang itself against the railing and bruise itself. You've got to keep it pampered for those 10 days so there's no defect on it.
That's what that was about. For some reason, I was just thinking it was like to endear you to the animal.
But see, that's the unspoken thing that it does. Now it's not just another field animal that you kill every day. It's something that you have an emotional investment
So
in.
it's part of that, I will not sacrifice.
Yeah.
Attachment.
So now when I sacrifice that animal, it's not like the one that I cut up yesterday to eat, and we had lamb chops yesterday. This is an animal that the kids are going, not fluffy. And it's exactly as Mabel says, I will not sacrifice that which costs me nothing. And so God never says that, but it's certainly you can extrapolate that that's going to be one of the big effects of that. That the death of that animal is going to have far more meaning than the death of every other animal that they kill every day anyway. So that would be my argument about that.
Gotcha.
And again, for us, it's much different because we don't do that.
Well,
You
can I
know,
ask a-
when somebody has the death of a dog or a cat, that it's a major thing. But go over to Vietnam. And what's the death of a dog in Vietnam? You were there.
Dinner.
Yeah. Doesn't mean a thing.
And people get upset about gerbils and goldfish too.
Yeah.
But they still have pets that don't qualify for
Yeah.
sacrifice,
Yeah.
for eating.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Hey,
more
Pastor.
eating them over there.
How come if the Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the ultimate sacrifice, then why don't they still do, like they did?
Why don't they?
Because they can't go back to the temple.
There's no temple.
Because there's no temple. And so as Mabel will tell you,
Yeah, the teachers who are Jewish that I've talked to, 2 or 3 different. They said that they're just, they throw bread on the water, and as the water takes the bread away, they hope that their sins will go away with it. They're just hoping that will.
What they did is they changed it over from the substitutionary or the vicarious substitution to the mitzvah. Mitzvah is a good work. So they believe you get saved by good works.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
So they don't believe in the shedding of blood anymore for the atonement of sin?
well, they don't believe that that's an option for them.
They can't do it.
I do believe that there are a great number of Jews, not all of them, and certainly not the cultural Jews, but the conservative Jews, that if tomorrow they could build a temple and begin to make sacrifices again, I believe there's a lot of Jews that would do exactly that.
This just happened today. There's 13 Jewish people that I send a Bible text to every day. And they were both on Passover the last 2 days. And I said to the one guy, I said, Steve, just checking, did you receive today's text and yesterday's text verses, which were both about Passover? And he said, yes. Interestingly, there was a news article from Israel yesterday about a religious Orthodox group ritually sacrificing animals like the Bible. It was very upsetting to modern Jews. That's what he said. Because they're very philanthropic and like that.
Yeah. All right. We looked last week at 2 John, and I said both 2nd and 3rd John, they're so short, they have a single theme that pretty well defines the book. What was the theme for 2 John? What was the theme for 2 John?
not run ahead.
Hmm. The fellow that led me to Christ used to say over and over and over again, the weakest ink is better than the strongest mind.
Because what?
Ink.
Oh.
Oh, it's the thing about don't make your house the base of operations for already.
Yes, do not support false teachers. Do not support false teachers. I talked about how the admonition there, do not take them into your house. That isn't saying that if a Jehovah's Witness comes to the door, you kick them off your property and drive them away with a cat of nine tails and tell them never to come back. I've literally heard Christians use that verse to justify that. What it is not saying is that you can't invite someone who is a false believer, a believer in a false gospel, to come in and discuss it with you. What you are saying is you cannot give them a
Platform.
platform. You cannot invite them in to make your house or whatever it is, whatever resources you control, use that to advance their false gospel. That pretty clear?
So I think it's right then. You don't bring them into your home. You can talk to them, but.
There's nothing, if you want to say, hey, come on in, sit down in the living room here, sit down at the kitchen table, and we're going to have a discussion.
Are you giving them a platform then? Or
No.
You need to let them.
No.
Hey, stand up and you can speak to us.
But that would be more, you can't invite them into your home. Hey, family, let's come in here and all of you gather around and I'm going to invite 10 of my friends and they're going to address us and tell us all about what they believe.
There's your platform.
That's a platform. A discussion is not a platform.
Right, because how can
Hopefully you are a better communicator of the true gospel than they are of the false gospel, because there are people who get evangelized in the wrong direction. But that's a different issue.
Right, how can you confront what the issues are with their religion if you can't talk to them because it's conflict of listening, you know?
No,
Yeah.
talk to them, but I thought about
Right.
not inviting them into their house.
So where are you gonna talk to them?
Like
Like,
porch.
Front door.
And you can. But there's nothing, if it's a hot day and who was it that always used to say, was it Greg Laurie, who always used to say, if you want to witness to somebody, stop at McDonald's and buy a Big Mac and a quarter pounder and give them both to them, because it's really hard to yell at somebody when your mouth's full of quarter pounder.
especially with food that they didn't pay.
Yeah.
Was Rahab giving them a platform?
No, she was hiding them. They weren't in her house preaching.
They were just hiding.
So when,
Plus, this
when,
wasn't false gospel.
right, but that whole idea of her inviting them into the house wasn't, but when Paul was in the synagogue and they threw him out of the synagogue, and what happens to him?
Goes next door.
He goes next door to the lecture hall of Tyrenius. Remember that account in Acts? He was giving him a platform. People were coming in to hear Paul speak there. He was helping Paul advance the gospel. And as far as the Jews were concerned, Tyrenius was helping him to advance a false narrative. And that's why they were so upset with him. But that's that idea of giving them a platform. And that goes beyond your house. For them, it was a house. Hey, I'm going to loan them my speaker system so they can go out and preach in the street. That would be giving them a platform. Do you see what I'm saying?
Because you can give a platform to people that are teaching the true gospel.
True. Yep. And that's what we're going to look at in 3 John. So when we come to 3 John, again, 3 John has a single theme. And there was a situation, and they are related in 3rd John. But what is the key verse in 3rd John?
What chapter?
Oh,
Chapter 26. Yeah. What is the key verse in 3rd John?
Is it verse 11?
I would say no, but you could argue for that. I wouldn't say you're wrong. I'm gonna give you a different one.
What was the question again?
What is the key verse?
is it 3?
No. 9.
I was gonna say 9. Too late.
Verse 9. What's verse 9 say?
I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us.
It's Diotrephes.
I know I pronounced it wrong.
Yeah, those Greek names. Diotrephes. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. So John is writing to one of the churches that he is officially over as an apostle. And he's now out of the situation. And what has happened as he is out of the situation, as he is no longer there providing direct leadership?
They're going in different directions.
Specifically, what is happening? You've got a guy named Diotrephes who has taken over the church and is running it like his own little kingdom. And he is the sole arbiter of who comes in, who doesn't, and what is his motive in doing this?
Control.
He wants to be first. And I've got to ask honestly today, how much of the church is run by people who love to be first? People who do not in any way have a servant mentality. I've always been amazed at the churches where, they have reserved parking for the pastor, and where is it?
No, right up at.
Right up at the front.
Yeah.
Really? What does that say?
In charge.
Putting him first.
Opposite of the first will be last, and the last will be first.
Yeah,
The only way I could see that being okay is if he had some type of handicap.
Oh, no.
yeah,
Well, they do have the spots at the hospital, it says clergyman. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's because it's probably urgent, so.
And that could be, but where, this priority kind of thing. One of the things, and it took a while when I came here for people to notice it, but once people noticed it, they really would ask me about it. What was one of the things I did? And I didn't make a big deal about it. I just always did it. Whenever you have a church dinner,
Sir,
Oh, no, he always goes last.
I always go last.
I was trying to go
Rush to
first.
be first in the line.
I was trying to go.
It's the way the military works as well. The officers will sit there and the enlisted will sit there and feed like the sergeants above and get everyone else fed. And then the rest of us will rotate in. And then
Yep,
the officers will feed us.
yep. Because that is an important principle to teach, to demonstrate, to show, and you can't teach it by saying it. You have to teach it by doing it, by showing it.
I always like to go last at the dinners because they're still preparing the food, so that way you have more food that comes out if you wait later.
Sometimes food's
Sometimes
gone.
turn to the left.
Yeah,
Nothing left.
yeah, sometimes food's gone.
Well,
Yeah,
Oh, Paul's got a man.
Yeah.
But he's got a man.
oh,
Walk right to the front of the line, whoever's standing there, I go, oh, look, a flying turtle. And I jump right in front of them and I'm there.
so this Diotrephes, he's gotta be first. And John contrasts him with somebody else. And who is it that he contrasts him with?
Demetrius.
Demetrius. And what does it say about Demetrius?
Everyone likes him. He's well spoken.
It's popular.
I think probably it's more than he's popular, and there's a slight difference between being well spoken of and being popular,
Well, yeah, well spoken because it follows
Well
the truth.
regarded.
well regarded.
That's right.
There are many people today who are popular, but I don't know that they are well regarded. They may be a big deal, but that doesn't mean that people think that they have a good character.
Yeah, I mean, you can be popular for being bad or good. It's just
Yeah.
A lot of people know about you.
Yeah.
It's something Jay Leno said, you've got 2,000 faithful friends, you need to move this weekend. How many of them are showing?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what specifically did Demetrius do? Did Diotrephes do in the church that he was doing to protect his status as being first? He specifically does something.
He gossiped about people, putting them in a bad light,
Spreading nonsense.
Yep.
and he wouldn't welcome people,
Who wouldn't he welcome?
the brothers, the real believers, I suppose. Says in verse 10, not those who wanted to do so.
But you've got to read a little bit between the lines. That's true. When it says he wouldn't welcome the brothers, what is it talking about?
Their teaching.
Yes. Who are these brothers that he's not welcoming?
Who would disagree with him.
Perhaps, but outside teachers, people that would be sent from other churches to share the teaching that those churches had gained.
So
For-
real believers.
But it's not just real believers, because I can reject real believers who aren't teachers. Here's somebody that just comes out to church. We don't want them. These were itinerant preachers who would come in from other churches or from the apostles, from John himself. And they would come in exactly like Paul had done. And they would teach for a period of time, maybe a few weeks, maybe a little longer, maybe less. And then they'd move on to another church, another town. And when they show up, guess what happens? Diotrephes says, "No, you can't come in here and teach." Why?
Share the limelight with them.
Yeah. What if they teach something that puts
A bad line.
me in a bad light?
It's going to obviously contradict what.
Yes. Yeah. I remember the story that Richard Owen Roberts often told about how he went to this large church and he was speaking, and there was just a real spirit of opposition to him there. And you could just feel it. You could sense it. And he was supposed to be there for, I think, 2 weeks, something like that, because whenever he went to a church, he would set a minimum time he would be there. I won't go to the church unless I can have 15 days of messages every day. If you won't commit to that, get somebody else. Well, he really sensed that it was the senior pastor that was the focus of this opposition. And that became clearer and clearer as he was there 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So finally he goes into the senior pastor's office, sits down, goes, the jig's up. These are his words. You're going to tell me why it is that you don't want me here. Oh, I don't want. Oh, you're not going to lie to me. I know you don't want me here. Why? And they went round and round the mulberry bush for a while. And finally the pastor says, well, because I don't think that you would approve of what God has told me. He goes, oh, what's that? And he had noticed that there was a hidden back door into the pastor's office. It was like curtained off, so you couldn't tell there was a door there. And it went out into a hallway that came in the back, so nobody would know who was coming and going from the office. And he said, well, God spoke to me, and he said, I'm such a man that no one woman would be enough for me, so he sent me. And he had a whole flock of mistresses in the church. And he had this private entrance where they could come into his office and carry on their affairs. And the secretary knew about it, maybe was one of them. Other leaders in the church knew about it. It was all supported. And so he absolutely despised everything Richard Owen Roberts was talking about. Well, Demetrius, Diotrephes is this guy. I don't know what it is about him other than that he loved preeminence. But there's something going on. He doesn't want anybody coming in because if people start listening to what other people say, they might be comparing it to what he says, and it's not going to come out well. Notice the word that is repeated over and over and over again in this book. There's a word, and you want to take note of that word. It's repeated often in the first 3 verses. It's repeated again toward the end. Now, truth.
Friend.
Truth. Notice verse 3. Come and tell about your faithfulness to how you continue to walk. I have no greater joy than to hear my children are walking. And then when it talks about Demetrius, what does it say of him?
Testimony, true, oh, and by the truth itself.
Yeah, Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone and by the truth itself. So in those short 13 verses, you have multiple, and again, in 2 John, he's very concerned about people who are bringing a false gospel. And here in 3 John, he's also very concerned about people within the church who aren't siding with the truth. And one of the things that we really need to see today in America is the connection between the gospel and truth. Because so often today, the gospel is about the effects. Oh, it's going to make me wealthy. It's going to make me rich. It's going to make me powerful. It's going to meet my needs. It's going to heal my, but the question isn't truth. Is what's being said true? I want you to notice something. Who were the enemies in 2 John? Who were the enemies in 2 John?
Cedars?
That's true, but you've got to be a little more specific.
John is also full of truth.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yep, both of them.
Antichrist?
No. What specifically is it about these false teachers? There's a characteristic of them.
They run ahead and don't continue.
That's true, but of something that is not about their teaching. It's about them specifically. So almost a physical, it's not, it's from the physical realm characteristic. Where are they from? Where are they from?
The churches.
Yes, they're from out there. They are false teachers who come in. Why is it that they need a base of operations? Why is it that they need to come into your home and have you provide them a platform?
They need your support.
Why?
To expand their.
Why?
They're out in the world.
They were banned from their churches.
Because they don't live there. If they lived there, would they need your house? They'd have their own house, right?
You're giving them a platform.
So these are people from out there somewhere who have come in here to carry on their heresy. Do you get that? That makes sense? Who are the bad guys in 3 John?
Is it a specific one, specific?
Yes. Well, it's one name.
Somebody inside the church.
Yes. So in 2 John, it's those people out there that are coming in here to cause problems. But in 3 John, it's homegrown people who are rising up to cause problems. Does that make sense? And of course, if you go back to Acts 20, verses 29 and 30, Acts 20, 29 and 30, what warning does Paul give to the Ephesian elders? Acts 20, 29 and 30. Acts 20, 29 and 30.
The savage wolves will come in among spread the flock. Even from your own number, men will rise up.
So again, what is he saying here?
Keep an eye out, because the people may not be from the outside coming in, it might be your own people.
Verse 29, savage wolves will come in. So where are they? They're out there. And they come in among you. But then 30 says what?
Your own people will rise towards the truth.
Inside the church, people will rise up and do it. Yes.
I got a question, and I don't even know if you would know this or if there wouldn't be an answer, but I would think that the outside coming in deceivers, they know what they're doing. They're on a mission. You say that that's always the case with someone inside the church, or would they just?
I'm going to answer that with a verse, because people always ask something similar to that. Well, do these false teachers know they're false teachers? Do they know what they're teaching is false?
No, I would say.
And here's how Paul answers that in 2 Timothy 3:13. 2 Timothy 3:13.
Is that the one with them being deceived? Them themselves are deceived?
What comes to mind is a solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution against all enemies,
foreign
and domestic.
and domestic. And you can see when you really begin to read the writings of the founding fathers, you see how much of that was based on spiritual truth out of the scripture.
Yeah.
It's not that they're quoting a verse, but they are taking the principles of scripture and they're applying them to the nation.
Of deceiving and being deceived.
Yeah, for evil men and seducers will arise, one after another, deceiving and being deceived.
Isn't that what I said?
Yep, you did. I just didn't want
No.
everybody else to, I wanted them to think about it.
You and your back.
You were too quick to answer. I wanted them to have to look it up and not just say, oh, Paul answered it for me.
I think there'd be more of a chance of someone in the eye being deceived, whereas like, I think there's people in the Roman Catholic Church who are just deceived. And then there are people that are, some of the higher ups, I think they really know their.
I think it's really hard to tell. And
Have you ever had something like that in here, like where?
Oh, yeah. And I've had guys that I think were just downright evil. We had a guy that came in and he seduced several children here into sexual relationships, and just all kinds of things. And I think he was very deliberate about that. But I'm not entirely sure that he still wasn't deceived. At some point, you have to be deceived to do stuff like that, because, when Paul says, do not be deceived, God is not mocked. The bottom line is, to do things like that, you have to be deceived because you have to believe God will allow himself to be mocked. As I used to say to people, if you're going to steal from the church, are you kidding me? Get a gun. In New Jersey, nobody's armed. Go down and rob Wawa or go to the bank and rob a bank. You might get away with it. How many bank robbers or convenience store robbers get away with it? The cops don't catch many of them. You really think you're going to get away from God? You think God's going to go, he was wearing a mask. I wish I knew who it was. Right? He took his license plate off. Oh, how can I ever find him? But we deceive ourselves. And as I was in a seminary that was very liberal, although they claimed they weren't, I watched people deceive each other. And I watched that deception, and they started down that road, and the blinders just came out down, and so you may say, well, they must know what they're doing now, but you're looking at a guy maybe in his 40s. But if you were to turn the clock back 20, 25 years when he was 15 or 20 or whatever, was in high school or was in college, and those deceptions began. And they grew and they grew and they grew and they grew, and now here we are.
I just read in the commentary before coming over here, I think it was Romans 1:18, around there.
Yeah,
Where it's talking about where your mind gets turned over, like.
that's a little later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before that, when it talks, and it kind of says, like, you kind of slouch on over into it, and then you start, believing it, and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you look in Hebrews, and what are some of the words that Hebrews gives for this course of action? Look at Hebrews 2.
In a way.
Drifting away. We must give the more careful heed there to what we have heard, lest at any time we drift away. Now, what's the image of drifting away?
Where you were supposed to be. Slowly allow yourself.
Well, I don't even know that you allow yourself. Where does somebody drift?
For the current
In the water.
In the water. Drift is a water term, a boat term. How do you drift in the water?
You do nothing.
You're not paying attention to what you're doing.
You do nothing. And the external situation pushes you along. Patrick tells the story that back when he was into drugs and everything and wasn't paying attention much to life because he was high most of the time, he went down to, I think it was the Morris River, to somebody that had a house down there. And the a dock out there, and he had a canoe, and he goes, "Oh, I want to go canoeing." The guy goes, "Great." So he goes out and he gets in the canoe and he paddles out and he starts paddling. And he's paddling, man, this is easy, woo. And he's ripping downstream. And he paddled for like a half hour, 45 minutes downstream. Said, "Oh, I got to leave in about another half hour, 45 minutes. I better turn around and paddle back." And guess what?
It was
You didn't have
hard.
enough
Yeah,
energy.
it's gonna take more than 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah. He said, and the thing I learned was, whenever you go out paddling in the river,
Go upstream first.
paddle upstream. Then when you're exhausted, you can drift back down.
Or just walk back,
Yeah.
might be faster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
carry the canoe.
Yeah, carry a
Or
canoe,
carry
it's easier.
off the motor.
So that idea of drifting is that it happens without our participation. And so you can drift. What's the other one when you go into Hebrews 3 and 4? What does that say about it? What's 3 and 4 warn against? This is a more active one.
in your heart.
Hardening your heart. Chapter 3, verse 6, verse 7,
8.
verse 15, chapter 4, verse 7. It's all through there, this idea of hardening your heart. Now, what happens in hardening your heart? It's more active than drifting, absolutely, but how does hardening happen?
Oh, you mean like,
Yeah,
like Pharaoh?
Say that again.
it's a simple thing. You just say no to God. God says,
Hardening is a coarsening
I
over.
want you to do this, and you say, not this time.
yeah,
I see disappointment in there. You were expecting something from God. You didn't get it. You feel betrayed.
it could be, but hardening almost always comes down to a no. God says, I want you to step out in faith and do this. And you go, no.
Already done enough. He's
time to
do this
do it.
one more.
It doesn't matter the reason, you're just not doing what
I
God
don't
asked
think
you
it's
to
an
do.
either or. I think it's a.
Yeah, it can be. But if you go back to, because it talks about, it gives a specific thing. Notice what it says about that. When did they harden their heart? 3:7.
They were in the desert.
When during the rebellion in the desert, God told them, go into the promised land. And what did they say?
No, we don't.
No, there's giants. And then God said, okay, you can't go in, 40 years wandering till every single last one of you dies. And then what they say,
Let's go in.
no, we're going in.
The-
Still look at it as a disappointment of expectation.
It can be,
We've been wandering for 40 years.
but this is before that.
What are you doing sending us in this area where there's these giants?
Well, how can it be a disappointment if you see all this huge fruit and everything that comes out?
Because there's giants there. We thought it would be easy.
Yeah, we
Well,
thought it
yeah.
was you've been walking around for 40
God
years.
bless.
son. What is this sending us into the land? Yeah, it's got milk and honey, but it's got giants.
And-
We're
and-
expecting, we're obedient to you for 40 years, walking around in circles.
But if you go back to Pharaoh, which is the ultimate, that wasn't disappointment. He wasn't expecting anything from God. He was just telling God, shut up and leave me alone. I'm perfectly happy where I'm at.
But he's not a believer.
It doesn't mean he can't, I mean, the Bible literally said.
We're talking hardening of hearts to believers here.
I don't know that it's drawing a distinction there perhaps.
Who else is gonna be, you're putting it with the equation of Pharaoh.
That anybody,
Anybody's gonna harden their heart.
the believer or non-believer,
Because anybody.
when does hardening the heart happen?
When you go against God's will, God says. do
When
this.
God puts his finger on something in a person's life and the person says no. And that it can be disappointment because I wanted God to do something for me and God says, no, I'm not gonna do it.
But when we're witnessing, we always run into somebody who sits there and says, I believed in that God except for.
Hmm.
I mean, my older sister will sit there and say, I went to Bible study and when I got there, this, and this happened. And that's when I realized this can't be a real God because this and this wouldn't have happened
Right.
in that church.
My uncle had a Lincoln Continental Mark IV. He bought a whole line of them. He'd buy a new one every couple of years. And he went to church one time. And it had these wire wheel hubcaps on them. Back in the 70s when hubcaps were, $20, $15, they were like $150 hubcaps. He came out from church
And
and
they were-
somebody had stolen the hubcaps off of his Continental.
And this happened at
Yeah.
church. So therefore it was God sanctioned.
Yeah. Never came back.
Because these people were supposed to be godly and look what they did to my car.
Well, I don't even think it was that. I think it was somebody driving by on the
Yeah, it doesn't
highway
mean
saw
there's
them.
someone at the
But,
church.
I'm thinking about what's
Yeah.
going on.
but God let it happen.
Yeah.
That it's happening in his head. Look at God, look, I went to church
Yep.
and you still.
And you owed me.
And you allowed this to happen while I was doing good.
Yep.
You weren't protecting me.
I still think it centers on disappointment.
And I'm saying it can. I'm sorry. But that's not the only time. There are other times.
But we've all talked to somebody where they'll bring up something,
Yep.
I would have believed in your God.
But I've also talked to a lot of people that that's not the issue. The issue is God says there's one way of salvation. I don't believe that. I believe that my way is just as good as your way.
If your God was a loving God, there would be more than one way. So I'm still disappointed that you say you.
You can put it in disappointment. For them, I don't think that's it's the rebellion. I'm not willing to
Oh,
surrender my way.
Yeah, they want to go their way.
God needs to bend himself to me. Now, sometimes that's about disappointment. God needed to protect my child from getting sick. God needed to, but other times it's simply, I will not bend to you, God. You need to bend to me. And that was Pharaoh. I will not let your people go. Do your worst. And when God does, he says, I don't care. Is that all you got? And when God screws down tighter, he goes, so what? and tighter, and he goes, so what?
Well, doesn't he go, okay, I'll let him go?
Yeah,
You know what? No,
he
I'm
does,
fine.
but yeah.
And there
And
are like
finally,
other times.
it's the kid, finally it's his son, his firstborn son, and then he says, oh, get out of here. But even then, he says, wait a minute, I've already lost the son, I'm not gonna leave my slaves too,
Yeah,
go after him and bring him back.
drag them back.
But it's not always disappointing. I mean, I can say for myself, sadly, I can say that sometimes I just say, okay, this, and this is what we need to do. I don't want the next.
Yep.
It's a long.
Because-
Do that.
What's another emotion that's at least as powerful as disappointment, and disappointment can tie into it, but what's the underlying thing?
Self-awareness.
No,
Like I said,
pride.
but I'm
Right.
not saying that I will order.
No, but I'm saying it doesn't have to be, because there are other things.
I understand.
But so when it comes to deception, it's really hard to, at what point do we become so blinded that we can no longer find our way out? For this cause, God gave them over. From Romans 1. They didn't start there. They started with much smaller issues. But every time, and this is the whole thing with that hardness, every time God keeps putting his finger on the same thing, what happens? Get a little bit harder.
Isn't this the same thing that happened in Jesus's ministry, where all of a sudden they're coming back to him and saying, you're your devil, your father the devil,
Sure.
and the ministry completely changes.
Yep.
Now he's bringing it inward and saying, okay, now I'll just work with my disciples. These guys,
I see it even more active than that. The first probably 6 months of the gospel of Jesus' ministry is what? Maybe 9 months, something on that order. What is it? Bringing in.
Bringing people.
And so you have the crowd, you have the 40,000 that gather to hear him speak, or the 30,000 that gather to hear him speak. And he's bringing in crowds, bringing in. Some point about 6, 9 months, maybe a year down the road of that 3-year ministry, or less than 3-year ministry, what starts to happen?
Starts, yeah.
He starts literally driving people away. Yeah, and you hear phrases like that from John 6 or John 8. Because they're coming in and going, oh yeah, free food, woohoo, Jesus is coming, free food, get the kids. And Jesus says, instead of giving them free food, he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part of me. That's John 6.
what was the verse you were saying that made me think of parallel with Jesus? I'll have to watch it.
Yeah. So once we do that, for the rest of his ministry, and even the last week, we have questions that are raised by people of Jesus. And at each point, he drives a group of his followers away. What was one of the biggest groups of Jesus followers by the end? One of them is at least 2 or 3 of them are his disciples. Inner circle, one of the 12. Probably 3 of them came from this group. Who was it? The Zealots. The Zealots really thought maybe Jesus is the one. And what does he do that drives the Zealots crazy and they stop following him?
When they tried to force them to take, to fight against the,
Should you pay taxes to Caesar.
Let's see.
And the zealots perk up and go, all right,
How's he gonna answer?
this time he's gonna set them straight. And what does Jesus say?
Give unto Caesar the
Give Caesar what belongs to his. In other words, what's he saying to them?
Pay your taxes.
Pay your taxes.
Yeah.
And what do the zealots do?
buy.
We're done. We know there were zealots among Jesus' group. How do we know that?
One of the apostles.
At least one, probably three. Yeah,
Judas.
Judas probably was a zealot. Maybe John was a zealot. What was the name of him and his brother, James and John?
Sons of thunder.
The Sons of Thunder? Could be a zealot name. But we know there was a handful because what event proves to us that there were zealots there? Jesus says if anybody doesn't have a sword, sell their cloak and go out and buy a sword.
Peter,
And what do they say?
we have three among us.
We have three. Who had swords in those days? Zealots.
Define
Yeah.
zealot.
Radical.
Zealots were the political party of Israel that believed that the task that God wanted the Jews to do was throw off Roman occupation by violent resistance. And so they practiced what we would call today terrorism. They would murder Romans if they could get them alone. They would murder sympathizers for Romans. They would murder tax collectors of the Romans. They would disrupt Roman financial things. They would harass the army. They would throw stones at them when they were coming through the streets. They basically acted like terrorists today. But it was not just that they were an organized political entity. They were an active resistance against Rome.
Kind of like the French resistance.
Yeah. Yep. Or any other,
Appear like the standard.
like the Americans, like a group, many of the Americans, before the revolution was actually officially, we declared. So like the guys that did the Boston Tea Party but they were very violent about it. They would murder people on the drop of a hat if they could get them in a place where they could do it without getting caught.
Do we know the accurate history of the 11 disciples, the 11 apostles between the ministry with Jesus and their death? Do we know accurately?
Only church history. Now some we know because some of them were killed in biblical times. So we know that James the Less is Herod skins him alive in the book of Acts. We know some of them, but not all of them.
If somebody had denounced Jesus, we would have definitely. Heard.
Oh, absolutely.
That
Yeah.
we would have heard.
Yes. None of them. And Rome would have made a spectacle out of
Okay,
that.
here's one of those.
Yeah. Just like, what was Rome's plan for Monday morning? What was Rome's plan for Monday morning?
Would Jesus not resurrected?
Correct. What was the Roman plan for Monday morning, or maybe Sunday afternoon?
Trying we got rid of that guy?
No,
Kill all the followers.
no. Didn't need to kill anybody.
Oh, no, not that they.
What was Rome's plan for Sunday afternoon or Monday morning?
Tell us.
Go to that tomb, roll the stone away, take that body, put it on a pole, march through Jerusalem with a phalanx of soldiers carrying the body of Jesus on a pole. And how many Christians would there have ever been in the history of the world? Zero. That was their plan. The only problem they faced was
You couldn't find a body.
come Sunday afternoon, there was no body to parade through the streets. So now they've got to come up with an excuse for where did the body go?
Okay.
And for the rest of the last 2,000 years, they've been trying to come up with a story about where the body went.
Logical plan, logical plan. And
Put it to bed, yeah.
Yep,
we killed that that leader of yours, you guys can all scatter now.
yep. And all Rome was interested in was one thing.
Keep the peace.
So,
Keep-
Status quo.
Keep the peace so that everybody pays their taxes.
Don't rock the boat.
Don't rock the boat. And had they taken that body through the streets of Jerusalem Sunday afternoon, Christianity's over. The apostles go home, slink home.
The apostles weren't even expecting a resurrection. They
Yeah.
were surprised.
Yep. Everybody slinks home and goes, okay, that's it. Was a nice try.
He was a really nifty guy.
And,
Yeah, that's the way.
right?
Good night.
And use that with people when you talk about the resurrection. That's one of the questions that I always ask. Why did Rome guard the tomb? What was their plan? To guard the tomb for the rest of time? Were they gonna keep that guard there, for the next 300 years?
Nope.
No, they didn't need to do that.
So they heard him say, I'm going to rise again in 3 days.
Well, the Jews said that. They heard the Jews say
They told
that.
them.
They didn't have to hear anything.
So they knew that if on the 4th day,
It was over.
One more. How many messiahs were there in the first century in Judea?
There were a lot
do
there.
we
though.
know the number?
Estimates run as high as 5,000 different people
We,
claimed to be the Messiah.
we see them now.
Right. It was a commonplace event for there to be people claiming to be the Messiah. There was a great fervor for Messiah's appearance at the beginning of the first century AD.
The century before.
Why? No, there was not. Why? Even though they didn't understand the scripture, I believe that there was a subliminal part of them that did, that they understood that the 70 weeks of Daniel was coming to an end and it was time.
Was that prevalent in their mind?
No, but I think that it was something that was a spiritual truth that even though their conscious mind didn't recognize it,
Okay,
there was this spirit, just like we were talking in Sunday school Sunday about, we're living in a spirit of violence and hatred. Can people define why there's so much violence and hatred today? In the parking lot of Mansfield High School with its 650 or 700 students in 1977 when I graduated, in that parking lot on every single one of the 180 days of school, there had to have been 30 to 100 rifles right outside the door.
gun racks with rifles and shotguns.
And ammunition.
And ammunition, boxes of ammunition shoved under the seat.
In the glove compartment.
A lot of kids didn't carry handguns. Long
In
rifles.
the glove compartment.
No,
All the guys I knew in Georgia, they would just open that up and, and
adults did, not kids. But up there, handguns weren't a big thing.
Kids were hunting.
People had rifles, and rifles are a lot more deadly than pistols. How many skill shootings were there? None. Why? Why is it today that there's no big signs, no guns, no guns, no guns, and yet there's shootings all the time? Why? And I'm going to argue that there is a spirit of anarchy. There is a spirit of hatred. There is a spirit of violence that has taken place.
How much does it have to do with removing prayer from the public school?
Sure,
Yep.
and other things.
The Ten Commandments.
In the first century, there was a spirit of anticipation for the appearance of Messiah. There was a general feeling in the air. This is the time. They didn't have that in the second or third centuries. The Jews haven't had it since then. You don't hear Jews running around going, Messiah's coming today.
So he's forgotten about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or that he's never going to come, or what. But in the first century, there was that. And so there were all these messiahs. Jesus was much more successful than most of them. Why?
Because of his miracle.
Because he was doing a lot of miracles. So he's a threat to Rome. Put him on a stake, march him through the streets. Doesn't matter how many miracles he did, he's dead.
Here's your Messiah.
Yeah, here's your Messiah. He's dead. We win, you lose, shut up, get your head down.
Yeah, this book.
Yep.
Evil beings.
If we could do this to him,
Like what they're doing to Donald Trump. We can do this to him.
Him?
we can do this to you.
you better shut your mouth, because if we can do it to him, what do you think we can do to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. But it doesn't work unless you put him on a stake and march him through the street.
All right.
God bless.
Bye.
Bye.
What's that? Good time?
Oh, yeah.
Have a good
God
night.
bless.